The amputee fugitive tossed out the food from the cooler, then carefully placed a cloth-wrapped object inside. Having been on the run for a day and a night, he grabbed a handful of crushed ice and wolfed it down. Just then, a young couple, alerted by the noise, emerged from their tent. Teabag immediately drew a screwdriver with a murderous glare, fixating on them. It seemed Teabag remembered something. He turned and warned the man, "If you dare call the cops, I'll jab this into your eye." After his threat, he snatched the man's hat and took off with the cooler towards the distance. Soon after, Teabag arrived at a veterinary clinic, placing the cooler on the counter and asking the vet to perform a secret surgery on him. Marvin thought Teabag was joking. After all, he was a vet, not qualified to operate on humans. But upon seeing Teabag's severed hand and his blood-soaked body, Marvin quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Marvin hurried to call an ambulance for Teabag, but Teabag had already jumped in front of Marvin, taking him hostage.
Nobody's gonna be doing any calling here, Doctor.
Fine. That's right. What do you want?
Marvin had no choice but to do it. Marvin offered to anesthetize Teabag, who refused.
Do I really look that stupid?
Sir, I cannot do a procedure like this without an anesthetic. I have to cut away dead flesh. Nobody can undergo a procedure like this without an anesthetic.
Ain't nobody.
Teabag feared Marvin might call the police while he was unconscious. Teabag endured the pain throughout the surgery without any anesthesia. Worried about infection, Marvin kindly provided him with some antibiotics and painkillers, but Marvin could never have anticipated. Teabag bound him up and injected poison into his body. His only form of gratitude was perhaps to make Marvin's death less painful. After all was done, Teabag assumed Marvin's identity and drove off in Marvin's car, navigating towards Twin Cay Town in Utah, because a substantial fortune awaited him there. Just a day before, 8 inmates had successfully escaped from Fox River State Penitentiary, and Charles, who didn't escape, revealed a secret with his dying breath. He had hidden $5 million in Twin Cay Town, Utah, meaning, aside from Teabag, the other 7 escapees also knew this secret. The plot of Prison Break's second season revolves around this $5 million, continuing the glory of Prison Break's first season. Since Teabag, along with Haywire and David, were abandoned by the main group, they avoided police capture due to their lesser objectives. The other 5 were relentlessly pursued by the police. Luckily, they boarded a train, granting them a brief respite. Michael and his brother were thinking of a better future by the lake. They were going to get the $5 million and then flee to Mexico to live out their lives abroad. However, the police had already issued a nationwide manhunt. Without money and clean clothes, escaping even a kilometer became an insurmountable challenge. But Michael had prepared for all this before even entering prison. He glanced at the tattoo on his wrist, hiding the assets and clothes needed for the brothers' first week on the run. Yet, what Michael hadn't anticipated was meeting an opponent this season who could outsmart him. A man named Mahone, a top FBI agent. Mahone, having just taken over the case, noticed Michael's tattoos were extraordinary. He held a press conference claiming he could capture all 8 fugitives within 12 days, then tirelessly sought out Michael's tattoo artist. The tattoo artist revealed that every detail was meticulously designed by Michael himself. Michael was almost obsessive, demanding everything be exactly as he had drawn, spending 200 hours to complete the tattoos. As for the secrets hidden within, she was clueless. Mahone then visited the office Michael had rented before his incarceration. Seeing the walls covered in pinholes, he realized this was a breakout planned over 6 months. A true battle of wits was unfolding, as he immersed himself in understanding Michael's escape plan and his method of erasing traces.
I want divers down in the river.
At this moment, Michael and his group headed straight for the cemetery they had arranged beforehand. The name tattooed on his body is the very cue for the tombstone. They retrieved money and clothes from beneath the tombstone, including fake passports for Michael and his brother's escape abroad, as well as a car key. As they were getting changed and ready to leave, an official car approached. The person who stepped out was Mahone, who had tracked them down based on the tattoos. Michael looked at Mahone incredulously, as he was the first to figure out their movements so quickly. It seemed this man was indeed no ordinary individual. Mahone, eyeing a fleeting shadow deep in the woods, initiated a high-intelligence game of cat and mouse. After escaping, Michael bought a bucket of chicken legs. Having eaten their fill, It was time for everyone to part ways. Michael handed out a few $100s to each person from the money set aside for his and his brother's escape. Though it wasn't much, it should be enough to get home or for whatever else they needed. The group hugged and said their goodbyes. Michael and his brother prepared to head to Utah, but before that, Lincoln wanted to call his lawyer and former girlfriend Veronica to reassure her. However, as soon as Veronica picked up, she urged them to turn themselves in, because Veronica was in Caroline's brother Stedman's house. Revealing him could effortlessly unravel Lincoln's wrongful conviction. Even though Stedman was armed, Veronica bravely made the call to the police. But when the man outside arrived, the men are not police, but Caroline's men.
Mr. Stedman, take a few steps back.
Veronica.
Oh my God.
It turned out all calls to the local police station had been monitored from here, and Stedman was merely a prisoner, all orchestrated to protect his sister Caroline's bright future as the current president.
Contraband. You gonna tell us how you got it in there?
I brought it when I got here
Whatever for.
to protect myself.
That's what we're here for. Remember?
To lure Lincoln out, Caroline had her people frame Lincoln's son, L.J., for murder, announcing a court hearing the next day. Though aware it was a trap, under Lincoln's insistence, Michael decided to risk the courthouse to rescue L.J.
Tell me everything you know about the courthouse.
Michael took out a toy water gun from his bag and then took out a can of black spray paint. Just like that, a pistol capable of deceiving the police was created. You would never imagine that the two brothers, Michael and Lincoln, were planning to use this toy gun to violently intercept and rescue Lincoln's framed son, L.J. An hour before this, the brothers had already made a detailed plan to intercept. Lincoln, posing as L.J.'s defense attorney, called the marshal guarding L.J. to request a phone call with L.J. Then, he quietly told L.J. to make sure to take the elevator on the right on the way to the court hearing. However, Lincoln was unaware that their conversation had been monitored by FBI agent Mahone. Fortunately, the father and son spoke in code. Mahone found L.J. and tried to find out what exactly his father had told him, but no matter how much he asked, Mahone didn't get any results. During the elevator ride, Mahone noticed L.J. pretending to tie his shoelaces, deliberately delaying to take the elevator on the right. Realizing something was amiss, Mahone hurriedly entered the elevator, declaring he would personally escort L.J. upstairs. As expected, the brothers opened the elevator's hatch, took out the fake gun, but as they were pulling L.J. up, the gun in Lincoln's hand accidentally fell to the ground. The gun bounced off the ground with an unusually cheerful sound, making it obvious to anyone that it was fake. Mahone immediately sounded the alarm and then firmly grabbed L.J., not letting go. L.J. knew he couldn't escape and told the two to run away quickly. The brothers had no choice but to flee in panic. Knowing the escape routes well, they managed to steal a car and finally escaped. However, during the escape process, Lincoln's leg was unfortunately wounded. Mahone investigated the scene and found that the other party was seriously injured and would not be able to escape. He immediately deployed the police force in various hospitals to wait for the rabbit. But the highly intelligent Michael wouldn't just walk into a trap. He took his brother to a woman's house. This woman was Nika, a dancer who once helped him steal keys. Nika was a foreigner, and Michael had once married her in a sham marriage to help her get a green card. Therefore, Nika was extremely grateful to Michael. But now, Michael and Lincoln were two major fugitives. If she harbored them, she would become an accomplice. But Michael had nowhere else to go, and he promised Nika that they would leave as soon as the wounds were treated. After treating the wounds, Michael turned around to get his car because it had fake passports for him and Lincoln to use to leave the country. The car was also specially modified, so it was very important. But when Michael returned to the parking spot, he found that the car had been towed away due to being parked too long. Michael went to the towing company without stopping, and when he saw the broken glass, he was instantly confused. And the bag inside had already been stolen. The towing company's employee didn't seem like someone who would compensate, so Michael had no choice but to prepare to leave with the car. However, coincidentally, Mahone was making a call to inquire about the fugitive vehicle's information. Upon learning someone came to pick up the car, Mahone instructed the towing company employee to delay the person at all costs. But Michael had already sensed something was wrong and took the keys to escape hastily. Michael met up with Lincoln, and the brothers planned to go to Utah to find the $5 million and then smuggle themselves into Mexico to live out their final years in peace. To escape the police checkpoints set up at every turn, Michael first called his own voicemail, pretending to arrange a meeting point with another accomplice. He was well aware that this call was being monitored. As long as his phone wasn't turned off, Mahone would definitely bring his men and drive over to capture them. Michael decided to use a trick, taking out pig blood and pork from the trunk that he had prepared earlier. The car had been specially modified so that turning on the radio would trigger a timed explosion. By the time the explosion happened, the car would be a bloody mess, leading the police to believe that the two had tragically died in a bridge collapse. However, when the car plunged off the bridge, it didn't explode. Michael guessed that the radio must have jammed. Hearing Mahone's sirens getting closer, Michael suggested playing rock paper scissors to decide who would go and jiggle the radio. True to his role as the older brother, Lincoln didn't hesitate and bravely went to do it. As Michael expected, the police indeed believed that the two had died in a car accident, at least until the test results came out. No one would pay attention to the brothers' whereabouts. During this time, they might have already gotten the money and fled to Mexico. Michael had Nika arrange a car for them, promising to pay her $10,000 once he arrived in Mexico. As agreed. However, they were celebrating too soon. Not far away, two pairs of eyes were closely watching them.
I need a little more. Take us right to him.
Bellic, who once had significant influence at Fox River State Penitentiary, never imagined that he would one day be driven to the point of considering suicide by firearm. Just a day before, the successful escape of 8 inmates had shocked the nation. As the captain of the guards, Bellic, and the warden, Pope, bore the brunt, the investigative department quickly questioned the two of them. Bellic tried to shirk responsibility, but the appearance of a man rendered him speechless. This man was Roy, who had been fired not long ago. Everyone might still remember how Bellic had ridiculed Roy at the time of his dismissal. Now, Roy, appearing as a witness, accused Bellic of long-term bribery and extortion of inmates, giving control of the PI to John, which gradually led to this major escape incident. Faced with his colleague's testimony, Bellic had no response and was fired on the spot. Pope, in a fit of anger, also resigned. Bellic returned home in despair. He had dedicated his entire youth to this job, to the extent that he didn't even have time to find a girlfriend, only to face such a miserable end as he neared retirement. Bellic became more and more desperate and eventually decided to commit suicide by shooting himself in his room. However, just at that moment, his mother's surprised voice came from outside. It turned out that the news reported that each of the escaped convicts had a bounty of $100,000 on them, and Lincoln had an even higher bounty of $300,000. This news reignited Bellic's fighting spirit. Catching them would not only allow him to clear his name but also secure his retirement funds. More importantly, he seemed to know exactly where to start. After making up his mind, Bellic went to the supermarket to purchase the necessary supplies for the journey. It's a small world after all. Here, Bellic encountered Roy, the very person responsible for his dismissal. Seeing his nemesis made his blood boil, and without exchanging many words, they began to fight. But having worked together for decades, there was really no need for them to fight to the death. They quickly came to an agreement to capture the fugitives together and split the bounty. They headed straight for Fox River State Penitentiary and decided to start with Monch. After all, with a bunch of old colleagues there, it didn't take much effort for them to meet Monch.
Curvy man, like yourself. Let's just say there's some filthy individuals who might enjoy a celly with a woman. And you're gonna tell me everything you know about where those convicts are headed. And I'm gonna throw you.
After some threats, Bellic finally learned about the $5 million in Utah. Then, they investigated Michael's prison visit records and managed to track down the whereabouts of the brothers by following Nika. Using the advantage of their car's powerful engine, they managed to chase them down and force their car to stop by crashing it into a large tree. By the time the brothers came to their senses and thought of escaping, Bellic was already standing in front of them with a gun. and their bounty was no longer their only concern.
Your pal Manche told me all about your little treasure hunt for Westmoreland's stash.
However, they didn't notice Lincoln quietly placing a piece of glass under the tire. Not long after they drove away, the tire was punctured and completely deflated. Bellic had no choice but to send Roy to a small town 3 kilometers away to buy a tire, while he stayed to guard them to prevent their escape. During this ordeal, Nika also learned about the $5 million and was extremely disappointed in Michael. "I've done so much for you, and you only promised to send me 10,000 after everything was done. You didn't mention the $5 million at all. Is this something a person should do?" Bellic watched this unfold with delight in his heart, but Bellic didn't know that this was actually their ruse. Nika pretending to defect was just to gain his trust.
Deal.
Deal.
After a sudden turn of events, Bellic realized that the handgun at his waist was gone. At this point, Roy finally pushed the tires in, but then realized that the tables had turned.
You really suck, Bellic, you know that?
We're all in. Let's go.
It's behind him, Mike. Ignore him.
You conned her too, made her think you loved her, and look what she got. An overdose and a shot at 30 years inside.
It was also at this time that Michael finally learned from Bellic about Sara's suicide. Turns out, Sara had survived her ordeal and was arrested by the police just after being discharged from the hospital. Luckily, Sara's father was the governor, and Frank had already been nominated as the new vice president. For the sake of his career, Frank asked Sara to throw the dirty water out, and he would take care of the rest. At this point, Sara has no choice but to agree to her father's arrangement. After being released on bail, Sara underwent psychological treatment. However, Sara didn't know that President Caroline had planted a spy by her side, a man named Kellerman. Kellerman believed that he could trace Michael and Lincoln's whereabouts through Sara, so he deliberately approached her. Michael felt extremely guilty about Sara's situation. He used Bellic's phone to call Sara to apologize and promised to find a way to make it up to her.
You and me. It's real.
However, Michael's confession was witnessed by Nika. Nika's willingness to help was not merely out of simple gratitude towards Michael. After getting rid of Bellic, it was time for them to part ways, but as they embraced each other to say goodbye, Nika took the opportunity to steal Lincoln's gun.
I loved you, Michael. I deserve more than just being the girl that you call when you need something.
You really think you're gonna find the money in Utah?
I don't care about the money in Utah. I don't want any more crime. I turn you in, I get $200,000. Legal.
Since she couldn't have what she wanted, she thought it better to cut her losses and hand them over to the police in exchange for the bounty. But Nika was too naive. Lincoln, having been on the streets for so many years, was wary of everyone and had already removed the magazine. Nika could only watch helplessly as the two brothers walked away. Not long after, the brothers finally arrived in Utah's Double K town. The town was small and not very populous, so it should have been easy to find the money hidden in the cellar of KK Farm. But after asking many people, they all said that there was no KK Farm in town. Even the old man who had grown up there didn't know. Lincoln began to doubt whether Charles had lied, but people generally don't lie on their deathbed. And besides, Charles had asked Michael to leave a share for his daughter. Having no other choice, the two decided to take the risk and go to the administration building to check the public records. After sneaking in and searching through the files, they actually found KK Farm listed on page 1213. However, to their utter surprise, this page had already been torn out. It seemed someone had gotten there first.
Someone else does.
The only people who knew there was $5 million left in KK Farm were the escaped convicts. So, who among the 8 could this person be?
Son of a bitch, still alive.